So you can do slide present and have the person talking and just give them.
All right. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the RPP BOF, the RESTful Provisioning Protocol, Birds of a Feather. As a notice, this session is being recorded. This is the note well. I'm not going to read the full thing, but just be mindful that you have certain obligations, and this is a note well that you probably, I would hope, you have seen before. So anyone need time to read this? All right, I'm not seeing that. All right. This is also a reminder that the IETF has guidelines for conduct, and we have an anti-harassment policy. Also, I hope you would have seen this by now. But any questions on this? No? Good. Not that I could really answer them, but anyway. All right. Okay, there we go. It's taking a little while. Some meeting tips. Again, this session is being recorded. If you are an in-person participant, we ask that you use you sign into the session. You can use the QR code. Actually, I guess there's one at the mic, and there's a big sign back there. When we will have plenty of discussion in this session, and when we call for discussion, we would ask that you use the Meet Echo tools to raise your hand and get in the mic line. Also, if you're using the on-site tool, we ask that you keep your audio and video off. If you're an in-person participant. For remote participants, we ask that you keep your audio and video off unless you are talking or presenting. And when you do so, we do recommend a headset. All right, so here's the agenda. So we are in the agenda bash session where I just did the greetings and the note well. We have one note taker, Rick Wilhelm. Thank you, Rick. If anybody else would, yeah, I'm hearing an echo. If anyone else would want to be helpful and provide notes as well, that would be appreciated. Before we move on into the other presentations, I'm actually going to give a quick history of this topic area and discuss the purpose of this BOF. Then we're going to start with a presentation on what EPP is, which is a current protocol standardized by the IETF, and how it relates to ICANN. We want this information up front so everyone has a base set of knowledge here. Gavin Brown will be giving that information, that presentation. Then we're going to go to Pavel Kolek. He will be talking about RPP motivations and the current work in that space. Then we have a remote presentation from Timo Vomar. He is going to talk about his work in doing RESTful provisioning at the .estonia.ee registry. Then Martin Wilnick will talk about the current drafts in the space and discuss some of the requirements that have already been already had some discussion both on the mailing list and at the hackathon. And we also have a GitHub page with that. We're going to round out the session with a discussion of the charter. So there's a charter in GitHub. And we want, as this is a BOF, we want people to discuss the charter and determine whether what they think about it. We'll have some discussion. Then we will follow that with some BOF questions. These are the kind of the standard questions that a Birds of a Feather session has. And then we'll go to our next steps, depending on how that works. All right. Any questions so far? Any agenda changes, modifications? All right.
They came and went, I believe.
Let me turn my participant view on. All right. So let's talk about the history of this work. So there have been discussions of a RESTful provisioning protocol, which originated in the regex working group. I want to say a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, is when that started. There were some presentations on that. Regex is another working group. So for those who are not familiar with it, a lot of people in here are also familiar with that work. but regex is another working group, and they are chartered for EPP extensions. They're not chartered to do a whole new protocol, though. So the purpose of this BOF, though, is to seek the formation of a working group for a RESTful provisioning protocol. The intent is not to extend EPP, not to change EPP, and not to replace EPP. So we want to make that clear. That's the intent. Again, the regex working group is the home of EPP, and that's where it's chartered. That's where that's the working group that is chartered to work on extensions for EPP. This, as I stated earlier, these proposals started off in the regex working group as a RESTful EPP work effort. However, the regex working group has basically said that what was going on was not EPP and therefore was not under the charter for regex. In full disclosure, there are other IDs which have been discussed and are currently under consideration in the regex working group about EPP over HTTP and EPP over QUIC. The QUIC one may not be relevant to us, but just so everyone understands, there are proposals for EPP over HTTP as well. So this is a birds of a feather session. It's not a working group session. So what we would ask the participants to focus on the problem that we're asking to be solved, the scope of the problem, and whether it's a solvable problem. And we would also ask that we not, go down any rabbit holes or anything like that regarding terminology, and that we discuss the problem that's being discussed. Any questions so far? And I think that's it for these slides. So let's move on to.
As soon as you have control, do you want to just share slides from there?
Yeah.
We'll have Gavin.
Gavin?
You believe Flickr will do what it's supposed to do?
Excellent, thank you. Let's give it a try. Good morning, everyone. So what I want to do here is kind of level set on the state of things as they are now, and also talk a little bit about how provisioning protocols, in the umbrella term, might interact with operators and implementers who operate in the GTLD space. We want to make sure that, I think it's worth making sure that everyone has a kind of common understanding of that. And I also feel that it's important to address a bit of a straw man argument sometimes kind of introduced as to why things can or can't be done in the IETF or elsewhere because I can, because sometimes we get used as a motivated reasoning for why things can or can't be done. So what the agenda looks like. So I want to give a description of EPP. I know I'm maybe teaching you how to suck eggs, but I think there will be people who are interested in this who maybe don't know what EPP is or how it works. I want to talk about how EPP sort of integrates into the GTLD namespace, and also want to talk about what the process would be based on things as they stand now for rolling out a new provisioning protocol into that namespace, because it is possible. It's not impossible. So let's talk about EPP. What is EPP? And this paragraph here, the first sentence, comes from RFC 5730. It's an application layer client-server protocol for the provisioning and management of objects stored in a central repository. That tells you a little bit about what it is. But what is it in terms of its actual implementation? Firstly, it is a data model. It is a way of representing objects in a structured way. It is a command repertoire, a way of performing transforms on those objects. And it also implements or describes a way for a client and a server to talk to each other in an interoperable way. These things are all quite loosely coupled to each other, so you can swap them out. So there are EPP servers that don't have domain names in them. There are EPP servers that implement commands that are not specified in the RFC series. And there are EPP servers that don't speak the protocol, the transport protocol described in 5734. So they can all be replaced, and you can compose a service from one or more of these systems, and it will still be EPP. So let's talk a little bit first about what the EPP data model is. XML is the basis for the EPP data model. And XML namespaces are used to identify object classes. So a domain name is an object that is in the URN namespace for a domain name. And a contact object is an object that is in the namespace for the contact objects and so on. And because of the use of XML namespaces, EPP also uses XML schemas to describe those objects, the properties they can have, the values of those properties, and whether they're optional or mandatory and so on. And obviously XML tooling, being very mature because it's so old, allows you to do a very good job of validating those objects as they exit a client or arrive at a server. And that makes, in principle, makes developing those implementations easier because you can rely on the XML schema to do most of the input validation, most of the out response validation for you. There are still situations where you do have to do some of that yourself, but you can rely on the XML schema for doing an awful lot for you. The 3 different object types that are defined in the RFC series, domain names, host objects, and contacts, they have set common elements that are unique across them. And there is a special XML namespace for common object types. So repository IDs, client IDs, dates and times, IP addresses, all that kind of stuff is a common vocabulary for those. EPP has a sponsorship model. This is kind of critical to the kind of access control, change control rules within a domain name registry or any other EPP server. The entity that creates an object is the sponsor of that object, and only that sponsor has privileges to transform it in some way or another. And sponsorship can be transferred from one entity to another using the transfer command, which is one of the command repertoires we're going to talk about in the future. And because of the use of XML namespaces, you can extend the objects and you can create new objects just by using a new XML namespace. So you can create, and there have been instances of things like email addresses could be created through EPP. You define an object, this is a mailbox, for example, and you can just, as long as you have an XML namespace for it and a schema for it, then you can provision it through EPP. And in principle, you could do the same with address allocations or AS numbers or something like that. So the second thing that EPP is a command repertoire. The most obvious CRUD verbs are part of EPP, so create, info, update, delete. EPP also provides some additional commands that are kind of, most applicable to the domain namespace. So renew is being the obvious one because objects have a fixed lifetime and can expire and need to be renewed every now and then. Availability check is really important for the domain name world because users need to know whether an object exists or not, and pulling a full object from the server is a very expensive way of finding out whether it exists or not. So check is a Boolean kind of yes or no, it's available, not available. And as I mentioned before, transfer. Transfer is a way to change the controlling, the sponsorship control from one entity to another. Sometimes things happen out of band. So transfers are asynchronous. You request a transfer, some point down the line in the future, the transfer gets approved, and that's out of band. The poll command is used to allow clients to retrieve basically an inbox of messages telling them about the outcome of out-of-band processing events. And again, the command repertoire is extensible by defining new XML namespaces. The most notable one of those is the restore command. So that's a way of reversing a deletion of an object. And then there's the transport protocol. So the transport protocol is how clients and servers talk to each other. There are guidelines for what a transport protocol needs to look like. They're set out in RFC 5730. They map very closely to TCP and TLS. And TLS is the only transport protocol that has been pushed through the IETF process as an RFC at this point. But transports over other protocols have been around for a very long time. HTTP transports have been around for at least 10 years, I think longer. Jim's nodding his head, Jim Gould's nodding his head, yeah. And we have draft specifications that seek to put those together in a formal basis for HTTP and also for QUIC. And you can see here the diagram is taken from RFC 5730. It gives you the kind of a state diagram for an EPP session, so EPP connection. And anything that can implement this can implement a transport protocol that complies with the specification or the guidelines for transports in RFC 5730. I think that covers the basics of what EPP is. is it worth stopping here and answering any questions before we move on, or we want to wait? Was there anything in the queue?
There's nothing on the
Okay, so we can move on. So what I want to talk about now again is how EPP is used and works within the environment of the GTLD namespace. So the first thing to talk about is the SRS model, sometimes called the RRR model, registry, registrant, registrar. Registries are, you might call, wholesalers. They don't sell domains in the GTLD space, don't sell domains directly to end users. The end users have to go to a registrar, and the registry and registrar need to talk to each other. And that's where EPP sits inside that model. Both of those types of entities in the GTLD space are subject to a contract with ICANN, and some aspects of that contract determine how they talk to each other and the things that they do. More importantly, specifically the registry agreement, which again is a contract between registry and ICANN, decides or governs what that registry operator may or must not do in its position as a registry operator for a TLD. So I want to talk a little bit about the musts first. So these are the things that the registry must provide. These are the critical functions of a registry. And you can see here, EPP is one of them. So they must provide an EPP service to their registrars. But there are also the mays. There is a process for registry operators who want to offer additional services to basically get permission from ICANN or authorization from ICANN to do that. It's called the Registry Services Evaluation Policy. The purpose of that policy is to ensure security and stability of the system, and also to ensure that there is fair and equal competition in a marketplace. The policy requires that the registry operator submit a request to ICANN describing the service that they want to introduce. ICANN org then review that service to check that does it pose any security or stability risks or any competition issues. And then, assuming that everything checks out, ICANN will provide authorization to the registry operator to offer the proposed service. So this is the process by which new registry services get offered. It's by no means perfect. Like at the moment, the way it works is like on a per contract basis. So if you have 100 TLDs, you want to offer one registry service across all of those TLDs, it doesn't scale, and obviously we're looking at potentially expansion of the GTLD namespace in the future. We're looking at ways to improve this process, and those who are particularly interested in that, we're going to be talking about that in the coming months with the discussion in the ICANN world about the next round base registry agreement. So how does that apply to new provisioning protocols? So let's say a new provisioning protocol is produced by, or a working group is formed from this BOF. New protocol is produced by this working group, and a registry operator who operates a GTLD wants to offer it to its registrars. This is how they go about doing that. So firstly, they still have to comply with the rule to offer EPP to their registrars. So EPP, it cannot replace EPP. They must also comply with the RCEP policy. So they must submit an RCEP request, and ICANN will review that request, determining whether there are any security, stability, competition issues. If it all checks out, then they're free to deploy. I mentioned before about the potential change to the way this works. One of the things that we'd like to do is, and this needs to be reviewed by the community and approved, and there's a lot of steps to go. The new base registry agreement will allow ICANN org to proactively review new technologies, new services, and basically give advanced permission or advanced authorization to registry operators to deploy those services, subject to certain potential conditions on reporting and notification and so on. So, and that we would publish that list on our website, and if it's on there, then you can do it. It's also worth noting that we have gone through a process of transitioning one of the critical functions to a new protocol recently. So we did that with WHOIS, which is one of the protocols that supports the registration data directory services, the other protocol being RDAP. So WHOIS will become an optional service for most GTLDs at the start of next year. And so, we'll be in a process of transition from RDAP becoming mandatory in August of 2019 to WHOIS becoming optional in January 2025. That's what, nearly 5 years. That's how long it takes, nearly 6 years for that transition to take place. Obviously, WHOIS is problematic in many ways. There was a clear benefit to the entire community that we should transition from one protocol to another. And so there was this represents a clear win for everyone. The process to remove EPP as a critical function feels like it would again require consensus from the community, clear benefits, and an obvious signal to everyone looking that EPP was no longer, it was essentially redundant for registry operations. I think that's something to be considered. I think the reality is that any new provisioning protocol would have to coexist alongside EPP. And thinking about this from a registrar's point of view, let's say a certain proportion of registry operators switch from using EPP to using RPP, and they shut down their EPP system. There's still going to be many registries who are still using EPP. So from a registrar's point of view, they're going to have to support both of those protocols essentially forever, beyond the horizon of the life of their product. As far as if you're thinking about this as a product manager, you're not thinking 20 years into the future. You're thinking what's 5 years in the future, however long that product has a life cycle. So the two things will have to coexist within the broader ecosystem. Registrars sell GTLDs, they also sell CCTLDs. They will have to support both forever. The other thing I want to say is ICANN is not special in the IETF world. There is a relationship, obviously, at a higher level, but when it comes to working groups, nothing that ICANN says you must or must not do has any bearing on the output of an IETF working group, or should have no output on bearing on the output of an IETF working group. There are additional requirements that a GTLD registry has to go through in order to be able to deploy a new service, as I've just outlined. But those should not be considered a barrier to deciding whether or not work on a new protocol should be done or not done in the IETF. They should succeed or fail on their technical merits rather than anything else. There are plenty of CCTLDs in the world who would love to deploy, I'll just pick an answer, answer from my head, like CDS scanning, let's say. They'd love to be able to deploy C-Sync or CDS scanning or something like that, but they're in a policy environment where they have to get permission from someone else. Maybe it's a government department, maybe it's their boss who's only works 3 days a week and spends most of their time on the ski slopes or on a yacht or something. That's just the same sort of hurdle that a registry operator of a GTLD has to go through, or a challenge or a process that they have to follow before they can deploy that product, that service. And we won't consider that to be a barrier to doing work in the IETF, so we shouldn't consider the RCEP to be a barrier either. So thank you.
Any clarifying questions that anyone has for Gavin? All right, thank you, Gavin. In the chat, they said that you gave a very nice, concise tutorial on EPP. So, oh, Rick has a question. All right.
Rick Wilhelm, PIR. One, the EPP tutorial should get put in a clip and allowed to be played because that was just like really good.
Thank you.
So +1 to what Stefan said. Secondly, you made a point, which I agree with, about the scalability of getting RCEPs deployed and approved within ICANN. Personal experience not related to present company about the challenges of getting those things deployed. However, I would remind the group of something that but it didn't make it into the slides, is that there is a fast track process that when an RCEP is done by a sufficient number of folks, it can get a fast track categorization. And then as long as a GTLD registry operator does the same thing that everyone else has been doing, you sort of kind of go through the electronic tolling lane as opposed to the manual lane where you have to, pay in cash.
That's right. Yeah. Right. So the fast track RCEP process exists, and but the number of services that are subject to fast track RCEP is quite limited, and it requires someone to be the first, right? And there's a penalty to being the first, because you've got to put all the effort into completing all the security, stability, competition, addressing all of those issues in your application, and then the second person can just copy and paste. And so it's kind of unfair on that, because it does, like, why would I do that so that my competition can get it for free? So the process that I've described that we're proposing for the next round base RA will take that pain out, because we will do that work. So someone from the GDS technical services, like Andy, I'm going to say it's Andy.
Oh.
Andy's going to do it, and we'll publish that up front. So when we see something coming through the IETF, we might say, yeah, this looks kind of interesting. We'll talk to some people. Does this look like it might be something worth considering? There'll be an internal ICANN process where we'll say, well, let's have a look. Let's do the proper work on this, and then it'll go onto that list. Jim, he's got his hand up.
All right.
Yeah, physical hand.
I'm sorry, I did physical hand. Yeah, actually, that sounds very interesting, because I was thinking it would be useful to have like stages of that, like experimental, where registry operators could stand something up and try it out, as opposed to wait until it becomes, final, and then finding out that it may not work. So,
Yeah, you're right. I would let's.
oh, I'm sorry, I'm Jim Gould from Bears.
Yeah. Let's talk about that at a different venue, because we don't want to waste time on that here. But that's a good idea.
All right. Thank you. And we need to move on. Says I have a publishing error. What's going on?
Do you want me to try?
No. Yeah, I think I've got it. Hold on. Okay. Confirm your selection.
Any chance you can do it in 15 instead of 1? Okay,
No.
we'll find place elsewhere.
If this works. What's going on? Why is it not? Let me try again. Can you see if you can intervene? Oh. Can you do song and dance?
All the slots
Does it
to
help?
requested
Does it
media
help to get the
taken.
slides?
Revoke slides. Share slides.
Yeah, mine seems to be frozen. Unable to attach media.
We did it. That wasn't. It was the other one first.
It's that one right there. There we go.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to you because that button's not going to work yet.
Right.
And you have been kicked from the room.
Yeah, I
according
know.
to me.
I'll see you guys.
Give me your clicker button. I get started.
Yeah,
I
I
will
get started.
do next slide.
Next
and I will
slide. Yes. So I am Paul Kolik from DENIC, and I will take a bit look at the motivation behind RPP and the current work in this area. Next slide, please. Yes.
There's a clicker that works for you.
Oh, yes, thank you.
You have control.
Yes. So to put it in the right context, also quick look into history of EPP. So let's say before 2004, there was already situation where there were many unique approaches to domain provisioning. There was RRP. Well, we love three-letter acronyms in this space, it seems, which basically needed some standardization to get it aligned. And then in 2004, the EPP was standardized, which is what Gavin already covered very good. It is XML-based, TCP transport only, supports for protocol and extensions, and right now it's very widely deployed by many registries in GTLD world and also in CCTLD world. But right now, when we take, let's say, the original mission of 5730, it was to provide a standard registration protocol. Registries are right now again developing non-standardized provisioning APIs on top of HTTP. It creates some certain risk of ending up in pre-EPP state. And naturally, EPP is not using HTTP technology as its underlying structure, because by that time, when it was created, REST and API approach was not that much known or commonly used. Clicker. Next slide, please. What we propose here is the RESTful Provisioning Protocol. So a new protocol for, let's say, primary domain names provisioning, but it could be also used for other provisioning use cases of a similar nature, based on HTTP following the REST principles, with data model, which will be, let's say, this is one of discussion point, but at least one way compatible with existing EPP standards. This kind of corresponding to what Kevin said, that the coexistence of the two will remain for a longer period of time, so it has to be assured. Having the mapping of objects in operation to REST endpoints, and having JSON as a native data format. So why to the RESTful API would be interesting approach in this area. So it's also related to some operating experiences with EPP, or generally in let's say TCP TLS based protocol. So the load balancing is kind of always handcrafted for this protocol, let's say, compared to HTTP based, where you can use a variety of tools on different levels of the stack. The rate limiting on the session, on the request level, but let's say in HTTP is solved. Identity access management, there's a lot of standardization in this area that can be used right now, and HTTP traffic management solutions and other, let's say, solutions like VAFs can be, let's say, just plugged in and applied to HTTP based approach. And for EPP to achieve the same, it's always bound with a custom solution just for this protocol. Ease of use is the other factor. So in this world, there's let's say many parties involved. There are many registries with many registrars of different sizes. Actually, the long tail is even more important than the big fishes. So basically, they can integrate easily with any protocol. They have resources for it. But long tail, sometimes they integrate with just few registries, and they want to do it fast and cost efficient. And right now, RESTful in this area is much faster and in the, let's say, more approachable. Also from the point of view of accessibility of resources, knowledgeable in the technology. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of one of this aspects. So like resource allocation can be done on the let's say root base. So basically for operator, it means that you can run different services, maybe on different servers or different infrastructure, depending on the let's say the requirements of different sub services. But what is even more important, that many of these boxes here are, let's say, ready solutions or frameworks or bindings in the programming languages that can be just used and speed up the deployments. So basically, in the cloud environments, especially, many of these elements are just existing. So let's say time from, let's say, starting even from the scratch to having something deployable is much shorter.
Oh, did
now it worked. Yes. So we have also BCP 56. We took a look at it. So BCP 56 is specifying, let's say, the guidelines for building HTTP-based APIs, and it also has such a list of reasons why one should look at HTTP-based APIs. I wouldn't go through all this list, but you can see there are many boxes that basically our use case fulfills. Two aspects, like availability of web browsers. One may right now think, okay, web browser interaction directly with the registry is something maybe we shouldn't put much focus right now. But if I look a bit in the future, it may be a valid use case, especially if one considers that maybe RPP has also an application, and not just on the interface between registry and registrar, but maybe from the registrar towards resellers or further down the chain. So this may be even a use case in the future as well. So the ability to traverse firewalls, then it will have its applicability as well, because if the web browser would be willing to contact the service, it would have to do it freely from any point in the internet. And also, when working on it, one may think to address some pain points in EPP. So in EPP, many things are possible, but not everything is easy. And this is just a simple example that adding additional email by the extension, yes, it's possible. It looks a bit awkward, but it's there. One may ask, okay, is the second email equal to the first email if this extension and the other is in the main data structure? But this is just an example of things that a new protocol may try to address. So if one thinks, okay, we will just map XML to JSON and we are done. So I think it's just a lot more than that. So with RESTful APIs, there are technologies like OpenAPI that enable the whole ecosystem of tools, which enable documentation, implementation, testing, and make it more rapid. Same developer experience, not just for the use case of the, let's say, pure domain provisioning and the areas, but actually registries are right now offering much wider, let's say, services than just provisioning, and they do it through RESTful APIs these days. And when the developer who needs to integrate towards it will need to interact with two different interfaces, which is not always needed or optimal. One of the areas is to compact the data model, as mentioned. So basically to look whether every operation which is foreseen in EPP is actually needed on the long run, and whether it can be prompt to also review the operations, and also the extending of the RPP. I think we can take a look of the experience from EPP and try approaches that maybe won't run us into the some difficult situations that we face today. But let's say EPP, of course, it's standing legacy, and let's say there's a lot of good elements into it. So we should incorporate it into RPP rather than just thinking completely greenfield approach. And RDAP is the other area which is related already in this kind of technology stack, where we can make a good use of it. So current work in the area. So it will be just a quick look. So I brought some examples of registries doing RESTful API, always on the example of creating a domain name, because it's easy and understandable, and in similar data structures. So EFNIC, so the French registry, quite recently opened the called Phoenix API, which basically enables creation of the domain name and other provisioning use cases. But this is just showing that actually what it does is corresponding to the EPP structure. So basically these are the same data elements going in different places of the original EPP payload. But you can also see differences. So the labels are not always the same. For example, in DNSSEC area, instead of identifiers of protocols, there are labels or names of the protocols. So there are some deviations. For sure, let's say good thought through, but they are a bit different. And in the scope, as I mentioned, there are added use cases to this API. So domain provisioning and the EPP part is just a fraction of it. And there is a lot of other operations that registry wants to offer to their clients, which is basically in the same API plane with the same authorization mechanism, and which is I think relevant. Just another example of .e registry. We have a small presentation later on details, but it just shows, okay, it's basically feels like same, but it's different. Again, different labels, a bit different structure. So basically fulfilling the same purpose, but a bit differently. And another example is GoDaddy API. So as I mentioned, it can be also the other side, so registrars exposing APIs outside. And here again, there are some differences. So you have, for example, the contact objects which are directly embedded into the model rather than being a separate operation, and you have additional attributes for extended functionality which GoDaddy offers. So this for me valid input for RPP to think about extensibility also in this area. And as again, the landscape is much wider than just domain use case. So again, the same authorization plane, credential management, and everything. And one of the other concepts that was shared through the mailing list, so it's not even implemented, but I brought it just to illustrate an element that DNSSEC, which in EPP world is an extension, right now is that much common in use that actually in this concept, the DNSSEC part is basically embedded into the core model, which is actually very thinkable for RPP as well. And there are many more, so I could build more slides, but I wouldn't fit into time slot. And even more organizations are actually considering building similar APIs. And this just from my conversations with different people. So this list is for sure not complete. So some elephants in the room, so just to name. So Andy already mentioned there is EPP over HTTPS. So why not just using that? Because actually, if you think about the infrastructure part, probably EOH would let's say solve some of these operational issues. But to be clear, it's not RESTful. It's pushing the same XML payloads over HTTP endpoint. So basically using HTTP as a transport in a sense. So URL-based routing is not possible, or if it's possible, it's much more complicated because one has to pick into the payloads to decide where to route the request. So again, some purpose-crafted solution. And then the limited use of HTTP tooling and frameworks, because all these tools and frameworks are more oriented to RESTful in this stateful scope. The other aspect is the stateful session. So Gavin showed the full graph of how you start the session, how you interact, how you close the session. This would be applicable here. So basically the session binding, which is let's say kind of problematic in EPP deployment, will remain here as well. So JSON support is not foreseen because it's EPP. EPP is XML based, and it seems that extending EPP beyond what let's say what it's doing well right now, it's not a first choice for operators. They tend to use REST for this purpose because they want their client to integrate fast. And let's say it was proposed like 2 years ago, and already from the first feedbacks, but also from some other conversations, it looks like that it's not what people really want. It's basically some kind of a patch solution, but maybe not the ultimate goal. So and also the second one, why we should spend time on RPP if EPP is fit for the job. So it's kind of summary of all the points. So stateless service architecture, it offers benefits. So the enables new use cases like transaction-based authorization. So right now EPP does it basically on this session. So the granularity you can get. URL-based routing load balancing. It can be combined with other APIs, integration in standard infrastructure elements, and what is also important, it's technology-wise very close to RDAP. So if the registry is running both, actually it may also have benefits from, let's say, architecture and technology standpoint. And final point, the RPP-like APIs are already being created and used. So it seems that this is what people wanting more, and starting this work right now will limit the future fragmentation or even more fragmentation. So basically, people will start to align towards one model, which will be beneficial for the whole ecosystem. Yes.
In the benefit of time, any quick questions for Pavel? Not seeing any. All right. Thank you. Timo, yes. Timo. Timo, are you online?
Yes.
All right.
Let me pass control.
We're passing, yeah, Gerald's passing slide control to you.
Yes.
There you go.
All right, ready to go.
Okay, so I have control. Nice. Okay, hello. I'm Timo from Estonia. We are running Estonian ccTLD.ee. And we have been working with RESTful version of EPP since 2014, so 10 years already. We started with this when we decided to stop using our registry system at that time that was produced by Czech registry, the FRED, because it was, for us at least, it was too tricky to maintain, and we decided to do our own registry system. And actually, I guess the EPP and the limitations and issues we have had with this was kind of partial reason behind this decision. So yeah, so I guess the main issues with EPP at that time were, I guess it's restricted nature or limitations or lack of many features that are, I guess, more necessary or more needed for this modern web-based approach of things. So it kind of appeared mostly through our, I guess, web interfaces, registrar portal, registrant portal, that we weren't able to actually use EPP for, and we had to use direct database access. That's kind of big no in security-wise. So the main features that were missing for us, at least, were listing feature, for example, to get the list of domains, to get the list of objects, and billing features, and also bulk operations to manipulate multiple objects at the same time.
Timo?
Yes.
If you're advancing your slides, we're not seeing it. Do you have?
Sorry. Yes. My bad. I forgot about that one. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So where was I? Okay, so we had many limitations and decided that okay, we cannot do this with EPP. It will just break the standard. So we decided that okay, we will build a new separate API aside of the EPP and implement all these special features in there and keep the EPP as close to standard as possible, because we have had many problems with registrars, most of all, I guess, because of the extensions we added to our own EPP implementation. I guess this shows the even though the EPP is called Extensible Provisioning Protocol, it's really tricky to extend, and this shows from the many different extensions that all these different registries have implemented around the world, and how different they are from each other, even if they pretty much do the same thing. And yeah, we chose RESTful. We chose RESTful because it's web and XML, and we chose JSON because XML is well structured, but it is very verbose, very detailed, and it complicates developing and debugging. EPP is kind of proprietary in the sense that it is unknown outside of the main industry, adding significant learning curve for any developers coming into the field. And JSON-based REST is, I guess, well known, agile, and simple. Devs know it. REST has native support for lightweight web clients, web applications, mobile platforms. It's in general faster and easier to integrate. Okay, so as I told, our journey started already in 2014, and the registrar portal was kind of the main motivation behind it, because we provide web interface for our registrars, mostly smaller ones that don't want or can't integrate with the EPP, and because we couldn't provide all the features we saw necessary for the portal, we had to kind of fall back to the direct database access, and when we didn't want that. So yeah, we created a new API. Main features. First features implemented were listing domain objects, listing contact objects, and bulk features. All these that were kind of needed by the registrars. By the bulk features, I mean ability to transfer multiple domains from registrar to registrar, update multiple objects, and renew multiple domains in one go. I guess that transfer was main or most needed, because often, for whatever reason, registrars tend to move long list of domains between each other, and using EPP, this is really tricky thing to do. And also poll message management is really not so easy with EPP, because you only see the oldest message, and many registrars don't manage their poll message queue in the way as intended, so they have many unread messages. So this was also something we wanted to address with our RESTful API, and the implementation itself was made step by step. So the first steps were, or the first stage of it was just implementing these features that were missing from EPP. So for a very long time, we ran for our registrar portal, we used both APIs in parallel. So all EPP features were done over EPP, and everything that was missing from it was done using the RESTful EPP. But as time progressed, we implemented the missing features from EPP, and starting from 2020, we have been running fully featured RESTful version of EPP. And I guess the uptake from the registrars has been surprisingly high since then. We kind of figured that new registrars would be happy about this feature, but we have been surprised by few of our biggest registrars actually converting from EPP to REST EPP. And when we ask why is that, they say that the REST API is just so much more familiar to the developers, so much easier to find devs that know, understand, and can develop on it, unlike with EPP. So yeah, few of our biggest registrars have converted to using REST EPP. I guess one other reason would be that because we implemented, or we still keep implementing new features only to the RESTful API, and we don't touch the APP if possible, then this will require for many of them to actually implement both or integrate both APIs. So dropping one would make their life easier as well. And as Pavel already shared, many registries as well are looking into this topic now. So I guess some step toward the standardization would help a lot. We ourselves are a very small team of 3 actually, two developers and me, who's talking a lot and does very little.
Timo, can you, for time reasons, can you get your last slide? And
yeah, okay.
if we have questions.
Sorry, yeah. Some technical details. Yeah, URI identifier also following REST principles. We have paths, we have we don't have internal naming conventions as such. We use Ruby on Rails for our own internal development, and REST and JSON is very well integrated and well-designed framework for this case. Versioning is in there, so this allows backward compatibility and smooth transition from one version to the other. I guess it is important to mention that we interact with representation of resources, not the database. Users can't directly delete a resource from database. They can only send a request through a representation. It can be JSON. It is JSON, but it can be XML. It can be YAML. There are other options available, but server conveys the intent, which and then is decided how to act. JSON was chosen because it's simple for its simple syntax, few rules. It makes easier to parse and generate programmatically. Rate limiting is enforced. API supports caching through HTTP headers. Security is mainly done using certificates and IP whitelisting. And our main, I guess, challenge has been logging, but I guess we have build this as well by making
right.
it really, really comprehensive.
All right. Can we, are there any, I don't want to, we're a little over time. Does anyone have a question regarding Timo's experience specifically? We can set aside questions about technology, things later. Anything in the queue? All right, let's move on. Martin?
Thank you, Timo.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Just wrap it.
We're done.
This should work.
Yeah. Okay. 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 So we're running a little bit out of time, so I'll try to go a little bit faster. This is just a kind of a recap of the last year, the work we did on different drafts, and a little bit of a dive into some potential requirements for something like RPP and our output from our discussions during the hackathon last weekend. So we worked on 2 documents over the last year, and one was about just describing the API itself. How does a RESTful interface to something called RPP map from EPP? And another document where we try to come up with some kind of a mapping between the existing XML schema to JSON schema. Which we do I point with? Nah, doesn't work.
Okay, there you go.
So this is an example of how, at least our idea of how we should may be able to map existing EPP commands to a API interface. So each command, like the create or the delete, for instance, or the info, these are mapped to a HTTP method. So these are all well-known methods like the get or the post. And this is an example in the on the right side of the screen. You see an example for the info method mapped to a get method. Next slide, please. And the get method is used in combination with a resource, and the resource is basically just a URL. And the URL contains a collection. In this case, the collection is the domains collection, and within that collection, you have a unique identifier for a single domain name. In this case, example.nl. So you're just using the get method on a particular URL. Next slide, please. And the nice thing is that if you use something like a RESTful approach, then not all the operations from EPP that are mapped to this new interface require a request payload or even a response payload, because some of the XML messages, for instance, for info, they basically just contain the most important part in the message is the domain name, and you can encode the domain name inside of the URL itself. So it kind of becomes redundant. Next slide, please. So this is what I was talking about. This is an example for EPP check command. I think most of people here will look familiar. So there's a lot of boilerplate here. And there are basically just 2 important pieces here. The domain name example.nl and the client transaction ID. Next slide, please. When you map this over to something as RPP or a RESTful interface, you can forget about the XML and just use the domain name part, encode it in the URL, use the head method, which is another HTTP method, and use the client transaction ID as a HTTP header, for instance, and send it to the server, which is a pretty lightweight approach. You don't need to create any XML messages, don't need to parse it, don't need to marshal it, don't need to send it. And the response can also be more easy to process, because the response can, instead of an XML message, can be, for instance, in the form of some HTTP headers, which are easily parsable by any client. Next slide, please. So what we were experimenting with over the last year was, okay, how do we how do we convert from XML to JSON? There are different approaches one can take here. What he first tried was, okay, what if we just use some basic conversion rules and standard generic tooling to convert the XML schema to JSON schema? And well, good thing is this works, kind of. You get JSON. If anybody, probably not a lot of people are going to be very happy with this JSON because it suffers from one of the problems that XML also has, and this is readability, understandability. It becomes very complicated because it's very hard linked to the XML. You basically carry over everything that's in the XML, even if it's not needed anymore. For example, in the XML part, that's basically there's kind of an envelope in there which contains the command, and below the command you have the create, and then you have the create part for the object, which is not a create, which is basically very easily also encoded in the URL itself. So if you would use the for instance an HTTP interface with the URL like /domain/example.com and pass XML to this interface using the same XML as seen on the right, and you would be using like redundant data fields. So this all feels a little bit complicated and could become a lot more simpler. Next slide, please. So another way we thought about converting from XML to JSON was maybe just look at the semantic level. So what do the attributes, fields, and objects actually mean in the XML? Can we transfer the semantics from XML over to JSON? And which is not possible to do with generic tooling. So we just have to make a mapping for each attribute from XML to JSON. And this feels a little bit more natural, and there were two ways we were experimenting with this. One was just use like identifiers, like contact handles or domain IDs. Another one was just include the object definition directly into the JSON. For instance, when you're creating a domain name, instead of including a host name, you include the host object, or what I think in EPP would be host attribute. So the name, including all the IP addresses and all the other information you would need. So this or you can use a mix of both of them, which we feel results in a more natural JSON, easier to understand by end users. I'm not saying this is the way we should go, but this is just an example of how it could look. Next slide, please. We have also been looking into requirements already a little bit. Of course, this is just a beginning, and most of the work will have to be done in any working group if we continue with this. But there are some areas where we thought, okay, this is something we definitely are going to have requirements for instance, for authentication and compatibility. Next slide, please. So authentication, this is an area where we can leverage like the existing authentication schemas that have already been defined in the world of HTTP APIs. There's a lot of interesting authentication schemes and tooling that we can use there, for instance, OAuth. And using these available methods may also allow us to think of other use cases that may also become possible when we have easier or more when we incorporate these other authentication schemes. For instance, there's been a lot of talk about the problems that DNS providers have, or DNS operators or hosters have, when transferring key material, DNSSEC key material to registries. So this may be something in this area where OAuth might be able to help. Next slide, please. And of course, EPP compatibility. So how compatible should RPP have to be? Well, of course, it's based on RPP will be based on JSON. Should it be able to convert to XML and from XML back again to JSON. We had some interesting discussions there, and again, that this is very preliminary, and this needs a lot more discussion in the group, or maybe later in this BOF. Yeah, next slide, please. And of course, extensibility. Well, EPP, the name itself, it says extensible, and it is very extensible, and it's great. But it also has some challenges that it can be hard for developers that are not really into XML to figure out how this actually works, especially in modern development environments where they're not really using XML anymore. They're just all using JSON and HTTP APIs. This is going to be more and more difficult to work on for developers. But I still feel that anything like RPP should definitely have a good path for extending the protocol, and even maybe see at the existing EPP extensions what extensions are heavily used and maybe can be carried over to any new RPP protocol as to include in the standard protocol and not as an extension anymore. Next slide, please. Yeah, and of course, there are a lot of questions about internationalization. And one of the interesting ones is yeah, should be used, for instance, like JS contact for contact representation, which is also being discussed in regex. Next slide. I think this is the last one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I made up some time. Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions for Martin on the work he's done, the work at the hackathon, or the requirements that he's collected so far? No questions? Okay, Rick, good.
Sorry, I couldn't get my hand into the queue.
You're exempted.
Thank you, appreciate it. Rick Wilhelm, PIR. Good stuff, really good stuff. On the requirement, I think it'd be good to add a section on transition. I think that compatibility is an important category, but I also think that transition is an important one for registry operators that are currently doing EPP, and there are a lot of them, as everybody within earshot knows. If they are going to have a chance to be able to do RPP or whatever it turns into, there needs to be an on-ramp for that, because for anyone of any mass, again, as we all know, we can't just have a big Frankenstein switch that goes kalunk. There's got to be an on-ramp and a transition path. So I think that transition would be a good category of things to consider. And again, not that you're not thinking about it, but just to say that to the mic. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we have been thinking about it, but the current proposed charter explicitly states that migration is out of scope. That doesn't mean that it has to stay that way, so we can change it, of course. So that will be up for discussion. But it is something to consider. Yes, thank you.
James?
Yeah, Jim Gould from VeriSign. I have 4 points. The first being that it's best to map instead of convert EPP. I think it would be a good way to bootstrap what's in EPP to RPP, as opposed to trying to create this conversion layer, because eventually it's going to branch off and not be able to convert. The other is that the authentication really would need to be investigated. I'm sure that there are many options, but providing for a scalable service-to-service multi-factor authentication will be really important. I don't believe that our PP needs to maintain EPP compatibility. Again, having the mapping would be really useful, but I think we discussed the idea of bridging. I have an idea on how to do that. And what's really important is to learn from EPP and look at the extension points. Ensure that's defined up front, because we even learned it on RDAP. I mean, you gotta go in and define it up front. And the last thing is that I believe everything should be an extension. EPP was that way. The main host and contacts are extensions of the base. So think about that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, except the last part that everything should be an extension. I have some doubts there, but all the rest, yeah, there are a lot of things that need to be worked out. So this is just like a first shot, and we would really like to work with everybody that's interested in this topic to continue finding out, okay, how can something like this be developed? How should it look like? What should it support? What would the requirements have to be? I think that's really a chance for us to, as a community, to join and see what we can do. And I think the most important thing that you said, okay, we should learn from what was achieved with EPP over the last 20 years, because I think it's been a great success, bigly success that should definitely take the best parts from EPP and carry them over, but also be critical on the parts that maybe were not that successful. And yeah, that's basically how I feel about it. But I'm really open in this. It's not that I'm really dogmatic on any of these topics. I'm willing to discuss anything with anybody. So,
Any other questions for Martin? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have reached the point of this birds of a feather session where we get to talk about a charter discussion. So the way we're going to structure this is I am going to run through these slides, which are hopefully a summary of what's in the charter. There are some charter questions that we will be asking at some point. So I'm going to run through the slides. I will let you know what these I'll display the charter questions, and then we'll go into a general discussion about the charter so people can make whether comments or whatever on the charter. And then we will take the charter. We'll do a show of hands for the discussion questions themselves. So there we go. All right. So by the way, so the charter is here at these links. I'm going to give everyone about 30 seconds to go grab it if they want. And I believe Daryl already put the link in the chat. But we can. Anyone need time to get it? Going once, going twice. I see people on their laptops busily doing something. Okay. Yeah, everyone's in this room paying attention on their laptops, right? There we go. Okay, Ori put it in there. All right. So the charter talks about a background and problem space, and it's a similar problem space to the Extensible Provisioning Protocol, EPP, which is now 20 years old. However, it's still widely used in the domain industry, and it is the most common provisioning protocol that we have today. However, there is a desire to move to more REST, more HTTPS and JSON-centric provisioning protocol. And as you've seen in some of the presentations we've had today, some CCTLDs are already doing this. So, and the experience has been that this is helpful and easy for integration with registrars, and that there's a lot of tooling out there to help with development of this type of platform. The objective and scope, as listed in the charter, is not to replace EPP. Changes to EPP are off limits. However, it identifies or acknowledges that there is history there with EPP and that we should be able to use the lessons that EPP has taught us. And there's an expectation that EPP is going to continue into the future, and that if this becomes a working group, it would liaise with the regex working group, which is the home of EPP. There is in the charter a high desirability to have be high on the Richardson RESTful maturity model, and I've laid out a summary of what that means here. Level 0 is considered just using a single HTTP method with a single URI, kind of like just tunneling through HTTP, whereas you continue on going higher in the maturity model of using URIs, multiple verbs, and then into hypermedia. Is this a clarifying question, Murray? It's on. Okay. What the charter text says is that what is out of scope is migration from EPP to RPP. However, there would be mapping. So the working group would cover mapping between status values, the data model, certain operations, and so forth. And there's an existing example of doing such a thing with EPP itself, and that is mapping the status codes between EPP and RDAP, and that's already in RFC 8056. The first deliverables of the working group would be to set its operational practices, and that is to determine, whether how it's going to operate, how it's going to produce drafts, what other tooling besides the data tracker might be used, any implementation requirements that the working group may require for drafts and so forth. That is to be put on the working group wiki. And then once those operational practices are established, there is to be a protocol. There's established protocol requirements also to be put on the working group wiki with documented consensus of the working group itself. And this is done to be in alignment with the IESG statement regarding the support documents. So those are the first deliverables. The milestones would be a core architecture for provisioning domain names, and then any specifications needed to implement that core architecture and any necessary mappings between RPP and EPP. The charter explicitly calls out that working group documents will have a written record of consensus, either in the wiki or on the mailing list or both, showing the approval by the chairs. And here are the charter questions we're going to ask at the end of our discussion. So we do want to know who's read the charter, whether the problem needs solving, whether the IETF is the place to solve it. Does the charter describe the motivations as presented in the session? Is it reasonably scoped? Have we described the deliverables necessary? And does the IETF have enough people to work on it? So, all right. So we're going to go ahead and open up the mic line. I'm going to ask that in-room participants use the Metico, whatever, light client, join the mic queue. Also ask you to keep your video and audio off. And if you're a remote participant, you're also more than welcome to join the mic line as well using the remote tool, but we strongly recommend you use a headset. And with that, Murray.
Hi, can you go back a couple slides to where you're talking about, no, for the back.
Richardson.
Stop there.
Stop
no.
here.
Yeah. So this is not a replacement for EPP. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is? Because if the functionality is basically the same, but the query mechanism is what's changing, like the data model is the same. I saw early on we're talking about discontinuing weirds discontinuing who is at 10 years after weirds came out. So I'm thinking like this is probably going to be 10 years down the road that it would change, but that means it is a replacement for EPP, just maybe not immediately. Is that
so
help me understand?
Okay, I'm going to summarize what I believe the discussion on the mailing list was.
Okay.
Which is that EPP is still going to be used and for the foreseeable future. So planning on its replacement may be premature.
Okay, but it's not that it's never going to replace it. It's just that's not a short-term goal.
Yes. Well, I don't think any of us can see the future. So
Okay,
I believe I think there's another benefit to that, and I don't think this was made on the mailing list, but we wouldn't want people to say, well, you can't do things in EPP because it's going to die.
Yeah.
Right.
We were wandering into my second question, which is, so if these two things share a data model, but they're different query mechanisms, one of them lives in regex, one of them lives here, who's going to keep them in sync?
Anyone else want to comment on that? I don't think there's been necessarily a desire to keep them in sync. There might be mappings, which we've talked about,
right?
Has been talked about. So as what I've seen from RPP, the requirements is that it might be a superset of what we already have in EPP today.
Okay. Neither of these are showstoppers. I fully agree that this is work that should happen. It's a modernization of an old thing. Totally buy all the reasons. It's the coexistence of two basically equivalent protocols that has me as an area director worried. Like, I want to make sure that this is going to be reconciled somehow, and the charter should probably pay some attention to that.
Do you believe there should be reconciliation between the two?
I wouldn't ignore the problem.
Okay. James?
Yeah, Jim Gould from VeriSign. I don't believe there should be an intent to keep them in sync. I would hope that there's a bridge that can be created between the two, so therefore we can reuse some of the aspects of both in both. I did notice, though, in the charter, there's no reference to the RIRs. Is there an intent to also address their provisioning needs?
If anyone from an RIR is here and would like to speak, we will let them, but I'm not going to speak for them. Jasdeep.
Hi, Jasdeep from Erin. We are paying attention to this. Historically, we haven't had a provisioning API because the scale of RARs is much smaller than, including even NARs and LARs, than the DNR side. But rest assured, we are paying attention to this and hope to contribute.
All right, thank you. Paul?
Paul Hoffman, responding mostly to Murray. It is not a replacement for EPP simply because this one protocol is not used everywhere. We already saw that EPP is used in lots of places, but not everywhere. Let's say that RRP appeared tomorrow. It would be used in some places, but not everywhere. And so to me, the question of replacement would be a statement from the IETF that says no one should use EPP from this date on. And I don't think there's any intention of that, possibly for the foreseeable future, like 10 or 20 years. That is, I don't think in this charter that there should be any consideration for the IETF saying to users of EPP, you should stop now and switch, or stop in the near future and switch. So there is coexistence. And at some point, you know, after all of us are dead, someone might make that, and the IETF might say, I'm planning on dying. I don't know about you. You know, but there might be a time where the IETF does that, but that should not be part of this charter in the same way that any search protocols, you know, and you were around for LDAP versus, you know, DAP and all of that. Nothing in the development, in my mind, should have any thought of a far future IETF telling people stop using that other protocol, particularly because EPP is good, right? You know, if EPP sucked like who is, a thought of, you know, during the, yeah, no, I know, right. A thought of that might have come, but that's not where this working group is starting from.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not trying to say that it should or that it needs to. I'm trying to understand. You're developing two very closely related things in parallel. How do we reconcile? You know, and it's as long as we've paid attention to that and we haven't just said we're going to do two things that are basically the same and they're unbounded and unended. That's where I'm going to start to wonder, like, what is going on here? So actually, the first thing you said was it's useful in some places but not others. Maybe that's my understanding of that.
It is
part of
currently useful.
Yeah. Okay.
So Murray, the also in the charter text, it does say that the working group will liaise with regex, which
Yeah,
is
I saw
the
that.
VPP. So does that help your?
I mean, yeah. I don't think you need to stipulate. Okay. Maybe say a bit. No, never mind. I'm just thinking like the coordination with regex is helpful. I'm glad that's a minimum. Maybe we should say something more specific. We can work that out later.
Okay. Robert?
Robert Sparks. I'll see if this helps or makes it worse. I heard you use the word superset. if we charter a group here and they create a protocol, is the group required to make sure that RPP can represent the things that EPP can say and the things that EPP can do? I'll rephrase that. Can the group choose to say, well, EPP does this thing over here, but nobody uses it, so we're not even going to bother to do it in RPP?
There has been discussion of some things that are noted as legacy in EPP and not used, and there has been expressed a desire to not continue supporting those things.
So
that would break the superset model.
Reasonable outcome that it's not a superset.
Yeah, maybe that was a bad choice of words for me.
Is there any desire in the conversations that you've heard so far to constrain RPP to what EPP can say and do?
That has not been on the mail. So I'm just going to echo what I've seen on the mail list, and that has not shown up. So, but I mean, Martin and Pavel are the two that will probably be more.
So, to specifically to the concern that you're feeling about the tension in coordination, I suspect that it's just a matter of making sure that people are talking to each other, that there's not really a technical coordination problem that needs to be addressed in the charter text.
So just as a reaction, Paweł Kowalik. So to address this concern, we discussed this during the hackathon. So the outcome was, which was reflected in this, let's say, drafting of the requirements document, to consider something like EPP compatibility profile, or then we have to work out on the name, which will define which kind of EPP version would be, let's say, corresponding to the operations and the scope of EPP. So basically the operators will have clarity on this.
Jim Reed. A couple of quick comments. I think the draft charter we've got here is perfectly fine. I think we should just go ahead, adopt it, and get this working group up and running as quickly as we possibly can. I've got one or two reservations about some of the text. I mean, they talk about things about putting things on GitHub and on wikis and so on, give me the heebie-jeebies, quite frankly. And I realise that those particular ships have sailed a long time ago in the IETF, but to my mind, that seems more like implementation detail that's inappropriate for any kind of charter for any working group. Personal preference. Now, as far as the discussion we're talking about coordination or overlap or competition between the new working group and with regex, I think this is just a no-brainer. It's a theoretical possibility, but I think it's highly unlikely to arise in practice because almost certainly it's going to be the same people in both working groups. So I don't think we're going to have a practical problem. It's a theoretical possibility, but it's highly unlikely that something's going to come out of a regex that's not going to have any impact at all on RPP or vice versa. Yes, we have to be aware of that as a potential possibility, but I think in reality, it's never going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Jody?
Jody Calker, GoDaddy registrar, not registry. From my perspective as a registrar, I mean, nobody's answered this, but I think it's pretty much a no-brainer, is that this does belong in the IETF, because as a registrar, we need to see a standardization on this. We don't want to see, you know, a bunch of registries that are implementing all kinds of different things, and then we have to try to implement that. I would also see this RRP needs to be a superset of EPP. I mean, we can't lose functionality when we move over to our RPP. Am I saying this right? RPP, whatever. Yeah, but I think it's got to be a superset. We can't lose functionality. And then, yeah, as a registrar, we just want to see standardization so that it's not the same as what it was back, 20 years ago when everybody had a different implementation. Thanks.
All right. Mr. Galvin.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Jim Galvin. Two comments. Speaking as one of the Regex co-chairs, and have not coordinated this with my other co-chair over there, but that's okay. It's interesting to me that you talk about, EPP off limits and not wanting to have anything to do with EPP, and so RPP is going to go do its thing. And so what I'm trying to make sure I understand, and I don't believe that I fully do yet, but what is this that's different than EPP? Okay, what really is the difference? So right now we're just talking about the implementation technology details. And I bring this up because it gets to Murray's question and the tension and the stuff that, because Ari and I have had this discussion before early on back in Vancouver about whether this should be a separate group or not. And my comment about that then is, as long as this is not changing EPP and it's going to continue to be a provisioning protocol in that way, and that's what it's going to do, then it should be in regex, not in a different group. Because again, getting to the point about it's going to be a lot of the same people between the two groups. Well, you're creating competitive work then. I mean, the regex group is a fairly small group in terms of fairly small core group that do most of the work. And if you're going to create two groups, now you're competing with resources to get the work done, which I think is interesting, although maybe this work will have other people that'll be interested in it. So I raised the tension point as something for, the area directors and such to think about. My second comment about this is really to understand from a technical point of view. I don't really have any issues with the charter and the work that needs to happen. I'm trying to decide if this is more than just changing a transport model, because if you're not going to say that your scope is to expand on what EPP is, if you're talking about wanting to learn from EPP, but you're not going to constrain yourself to making sure that you only support what EPP does, you're doing a new provisioning protocol. And this comment, I made this comment in DELEG, actually, one of the things when it first started up, and I make the comment here, although there's obviously some traction in doing something, and I have a suspicion that if this work goes forward, it's going to evolve past an EPP thing, and it's going to be a new protocol, notwithstanding all of the nice things that say it's not going to change it and it's not going to be anything different. We still have at least half of our industry that uses EPP and is mandated to support it. And although it's interesting for the IETF to think about, oh, I've got new technology, the authority structure, notwithstanding Gavin's presentation earlier, which I agree with completely. I mean, he certainly laid out where the rules all are, and we shouldn't be driven by that. We can't ignore the fact that one's ability to adopt this is constrained in half the industry, right? It's not an absolute rejection and a removal of it, but we can't ignore that fact. So even suggesting that we're not going to talk about that as we go along is, I think, inappropriate. And to lift that out of this working group is kind of the wrong place. I worry that the IETF is going to propose something that, sure, there's some interest in it, but I don't know how far that's all going to go. I just want to raise that up. And I said that in DELEG too, when they're talking about doing something different there. I don't want to get in the way of interesting new technology, but we can't ignore the fact, that there's a group of us that have very real authority constraints. Sorry to talk so long.
All right. Actually, I believe Rick is next. Can you join the queue? Okay. It's all right. Yeah.
Thanks, Rick Wilhelm, PIR. So I guess I made the point earlier about hoping that we would address transition. And I would offer that the reason to further support that, and this is like getting a little bit into what Jim Galvin was just talking about, I think it's important that it address transition to show that something like that the new protocol is implementable and can get deployed into production, and that it provides an on-ramp, because I think that the authority structure or the contract regime, as Jim put it, may welcome a new protocol, because I think it opens up and presents new operational and business opportunities for a segment of the business world and the operational world that might currently be restricted or impeded from accessing GTLD registries for a lot of the reasons that Timo, I think I got his name right, was talking about earlier. A lot of what he said, while I might not have agreed entirely with it, a lot of it resonated with stuff that I've heard from customers and potential customers over, heck, 20 years, right? And so I think that while it's not the IETF's place to make policy, we make mechanism here in this context. I think it would be helpful for the broader policymaking community for the IETF to provide a new mechanism that would open up this world and provide a new protocol for the next 20 years in the same way that the adoption of EPP opened up the registration world and standardized it and enabled huge growth in domain e-commerce over the, in the last 20 years. I think that the IETF needs to be thinking about the protocol for the next 20 years. And now's a great time to get on with this and include transition to provide that on-ramp. Thank you.
Anton?
Anton Schuren, the other regex co-chair. When I first, was consuming this, I had some reservation, but I've actually become quite aware that I actually like this idea. I do have some reservations still on the goals that I see written here and in the charter, especially also to voice what other people have said. I mean, Pavel gave a nice review of why we did EPP back in 2004, and that was consolidation. We wanted to create a protocol not only for GTLDs, but for anything that is any registry, and to have a common consolidation of all the wild grow of extensions in EPP to be, so that registrars would not have to implement 100 APIs to 100 registries that they needed to support. What I miss a little bit in the charter is that goal, the goal of this should be a generic provisioning protocol that would support as many registries as possible, not only GTLDs, not only CCTLDs, RERs. I often give the example of Enum, which of course has died a slow death, but that is the thing that I sort of like miss in the charter that I think could be added.
Okay. Let's let Marika go and then.
Yeah. Marika Kao, sorry, I'm still old school IETF. I got to get into this new world. I just wanted to support this work because when I saw that a number of different CCTLDs are actually implementing their own version of things, right? It's always nice to have something standardized. And, to me, that is much better than thinking, in a different way.
Thank you. Brenner?
Werner Staub, Core Association. There's one thing I would like to have added to the objectives, and that is indirect provisioning. Let's say lots of provisioning takes place between resellers and registrars who then send on the thing in EPP. Sometimes it's actually a number of steps in the channel. And we had lots of problems last time with this being so incompatible if it was just EPP. So if we could include that objective, that would make life quite a bit easier for much of the ecosystem.
So I guess that goes along with Anton's thing about it being a little more generic than just domains. Okay. Paul?
Paul Hoffman, really briefly on two things. Instead of being just more generic, and a couple people brought it up, I think listing known use cases for EPP in this charter is reasonable. Doesn't mean we're going to meet them all. I think that's fine. The main reason I put myself in the queue, though, is a couple people have said, well, if this is just a different transport, it's not, so far from what we've seen, just a different transport. It's a different connection model. We're sitting here in the IETF. IETF can easily do, and I've done it in DNS, oh, over this transport, right? I've written 2 of the 3 additional DNS transports. That's not what we're talking about. A different connection model takes the kind of engineering expertise that the IETF brings.
Thank you, Paul. Pavel?
Yes. I would like to just express my support for making this work in this separate working group instead of regex, which will allow us to, let's say, not being constrained, let's say, by EPP when defining RPP. We had this discussion long time, and the conclusion was that RPP is not EPP in its, let's say, goals and objectives. And from this perspective, this will allow us also to include other people in the work on this working group, which are maybe right now not on the regex.
All right. And since the queue is locked, but Martin started all of this, we'll let him have the last word.
Thank you very much. Just a quick response to Antoine's comments. And the charter text as is contains a text about looking into future use cases beyond domain name registrations or domain name provisioning. Maybe we should make it more clear in the text. I'm okay with that. But it is definitely something that we're added to the text.
Yeah. So what I heard was examining potential uses in other types of internet registries, and also cases of indirection, I guess, or resellers. I don't know how we would put that, but that's what I heard. All right. So we have a little under 15 minutes left, but we do want to take some time to answer some questions. And my very capable co-chair is going to load some questions into the hands up tool. So if we could go ahead and start. Have you already, so we have the first question, which is, who has read the charter? All right, so it would appear that we have a fair number of people who have read the charter. The number keeps going up. Yeah.
Give it a few more seconds. A lot of phones that have to reload to get to the charter tool.
And what a wonderful tool it is. All right, is everyone, do we think everyone's, here you can't load it?
There's significant.
Yeah, I think we have pretty good and clear understanding that a lot of people have read the charter.
Moving on to the next question.
Which is good, which is good. Is this a problem that needs to be solved?
More people than have read the charter.
That's fine. That's fine. You want to do
from excellent presentations.
Yes. Should we move to the next question? All right. So the next question is the IETF the right place to solve it? I'll give people about 10 seconds here. All right, I think that's good. That's good showing. Does the charter describe the motivations that have been presented in this session? Yes, yes.
With the caveat.
Yes, we may add to it based on feedback we've gotten. All right, I note there is one dissent there, so I want to, once we're finished with the questions, I would like to come back and ask that person if they would like to give us some feedback there. So let's move to the next one. Does the charter reasonably scope the work? Ooh. All right, I think that's good. Does the charter describe the deliverables to be produced by the working group?
We phrased the last question wrong. We should have said, "Are you prepared?"
Oh, yeah. By potential working group. All right, I think we should move on to the next one. Do we have enough people in the IETF and the right people to work on this? All right. So for the charter describing the motivations as presented in this working group, did anyone want to speak to why they don't believe the charter reflects that? All right, let's go to the, okay, Jim.
I need to unlock the queue.
Sorry, that's right.
The queue is now unlocked.
Yeah, sorry, too many things to click on the thing. I'll just come back to the second point that I had made before. I really am concerned about the relationship between this and EPP. I think we're just being a little misleading by not stating up front that this is more of a general purpose. It's more than just a connection model. So I take Paul's comment earlier that, let's be clear about where we're going here. But there is also an opportunity to be making changes to a provisioning protocol. And I really think that we should be honest about that. Either be very clear we're not doing that, or, right now we're still allowing for it, even though the words spoken suggest we're not going to do that. Thanks.
Okay, Anton?
Yeah, and Anton van Schuren, to add to Jim, one of the things I also don't read in the charter yet is, and we have an issue in that in our own working group as well. What's the link between RPP and RDEP, right? If there is any, is that something that we should be looking at too?
That's a good point. Murray.
I would like to invite anybody who said that there's not enough scope definition to maybe offer what they would like to see that's not there.
Is that a send text request? Okay, okay. Jim?
Jim Gold-Verson, sorry, I didn't put my hand up there. I think the first is I like the approach that DELEG is taking related to looking at different options associated with addressing the problem. I didn't see anything in the scope related to like ideation or anything like that in there. I'm not sure what language is in the DELEG charter that cause that to occur. I do have some additional tweaks in the charter that I'll go ahead and share on the mailing list.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Kevin?
No, yeah.
Hi, yeah, Gavin Brown from ICANN. So there wasn't a I don't know option for the question. Do we have enough resources? Do we have enough people to do this? Given the fact, as has been mentioned previously, that anyone who's working on this is probably going to also be involved in regex. And I worry not so much about will this working group have enough people, but what the impact that will have on regex. We had a session yesterday where we looked at, what's new work that is coming into regex. Regex is fairly busy for a small working group. It's quite busy. But it's got very limited bandwidth, and the number of people who contribute to reviews and feedback on documents that go through regex is limited. And I worry that it's a zero-sum situation. There are people who will benefit from RPP who don't come to IETF meetings. If we can get them to come in and contribute, and I would maybe ask people to evangelize in that group and to come to join the IETF to contribute to RPP for very selfish, or not selfish reasons, but for regex selfish reasons, that would definitely solve the bandwidth issue. I think it would be good for the IETF as well.
Yeah, I will note on the mailing list, there have been some people who don't normally participate in the IETF who said that they would review documents. So I think that's a good thing. Mr. Galvin.
Yeah, I'll just Jim Galvin, adding to what Gavin said. I worry more about regex losing people than I do about this losing people. I mean, we're more likely to pull a few more people into here. So that's an important resource thing to think about. I jumped up originally, though, to comment on Mary's comment about the charter. And, Andy, you were suggesting, oh, is that a request for text and stuff? As an individual, I'm just trying to stay neutral about this work. I'm neither objecting nor leading it. So I was making a particular, responding to your question about, the charter. There's a question that's not answered in my mind in the charter. I'm more inclined for the consensus of this group to decide what the answer is, and then you'll reflect that in the charter. Not that I want to pick the answer, okay, but I am concerned about the scope overall in terms of its relationship to EPP, and is it a provisioning thing or just a connection model on top of EPP? And I think we should just be very clear about that,
okay,
and make that choice. And whatever that turns out to be, it is. Thank you.
And you don't think that is answered in the current charter?
No,
okay.
I don't. I think the words that we've talked about here versus what's in the charter, I don't think that's clearly answered.
Okay. Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, this is Martin. I'd also like to add a little bit to what Gavin said, that this is, especially regex is a small group, and this will probably, the RPP group will also be a small group, but that doesn't mean that this is the entire community that's working on this. For instance, there's a lot of interest in European CCTLDs and within the center community, which is like the cooperation between European Center members. So I think even outside of the working group, there will be a lot of interest and feedback and even review work being done. And even though that might not be as visible in the working group, it will eventually filter back in. And we have been trying to get more, at least European CCTLDs to become active in IETF, especially regex. So this is also an ongoing process.
James Gould, last one in the mic line.
Jim Gould, VeriSign. Sorry for the long walk. I had to plug my laptop in. Yeah, I have concerns related about the amount of people to be able to do this work. I think we may be underestimating the amount of effort here. I remember working with Scott when he was creating EPP, and I got to tell you, it's a huge undertaking. The other thing is we don't have very many registrars. I mean, we got Jody that came at the last minute to be here, but we don't have very many registrars. We don't have that many CCTLD operators. So it may be very challenging for us to create something for our ecosystem with the limited participants. So maybe we can find a way to recruit. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a constant problem in the IETF, but I'll note that regex itself doesn't have a lot of registrars who show up. So did you want to?
Just to call out that for the parts of the work that is related to defining a new layer of application protocol over HTTP, we have groups like the HTTP Directorate that do reviews across groups. And there is in the HTTP API working group, there's a reasonable body of HTTP API folks who would probably be open to providing feedback on the technical side of the design.
Pavel, are you responding to something that was said, or is this a new comment?
Just last comment on the topic of resources. So from my personal conversations, there's quite a lot of people which are not attending to regex right now, which are, let's say, looking into the work of RPP. And I think there's an also opportunity of like spillover effect to the regex if they, let's say, enter IETF work. So I think this can be a positive a signal actually for the community, which is not yet here represented.
All right. Yeah, so I think we're over time, or at time. I've noticed that, so we have cut the mic line. So as far as next steps, I think this next goes to the AD, and if he wants to get up and make a comment or two.
All right, Ori Steele, responsible area director. First of all, I want to thank the chairs for running a really successful BOF and for all the participants who came to the mic to share your thoughts or were in the chat sharing your opinions. I want to encourage you to continue to share those on the mailing list. I've taken the current draft charter that we've been discussing here, and it's in the BOF in the charter section now in the data tracker. Apologies for not doing that sooner. Obviously, we've got some refinement to do in the charter based on the conversations we've been having here, but from a process standpoint, we're going to continue those charter discussions on the list. We'll make some revisions. I encourage you to continue to use GitHub to track the charter revisions. That's going to make it easy for me. When you all, and we can see that the list is sort of settled, you bring it to me. I've got it from that point on. This is my first BOF. So Murray, any feedback for me or any other process points you want to make? All right, thank you.
Yeah, with respect to the charter, if you can't put an issue in GitHub, send it to the mailing list and I'll process it. So
yeah, I think you can relay comments through any of the proponents, or myself as an area director. Please come talk to me if you have anything you don't want to say. I'm happy to hear your opinion.
All right, Daryl, you want the last word?
Nope.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That went pretty well.